Welcome back to Caroline's Online Academy, and in this video, we're going to be learning certain concepts that are required to be solving the cash flow statement questions that are asked in the board examination. Cash flow statement is a chapter from which CBSE tests up to 8 marks in the board examination every year. One of which will be a 6 mark question, and then you might have a couple of one-word questions. Sometimes it is just 7 marks with one-word question and six-mark questions, one 6 mark question, or it is two one-word questions and one 6 mark question. Now, the theory part of this chapter, I'll be teaching in the videos later. And I've numbered this particular video as two because I'm directly going to the problem solving part, as that is a need of the hour for my students whom I'm teaching currently in school right now. So I'm going to number this video as two, and all the theory videos I most probably will upload in a couple of days. That I will number them as 1A, 1, 2, 1, 3 to complete this playlist. So currently I'm just going directly into the problem solving part. Now, in order to solve the 6 mark cash flow statement problems, even before we start solving the problems actually, we need to understand certain concepts. We need to understand certain requirements, and we need to understand the pattern of questions that are asked in CBSE board examinations. Now, from experience and from the previous year questions and whatever syllabus is given, what we've come to understand is in order to solve the CBSE 6 mark problem, even before we start solving a problem, we need to complete 3 working notes minimum. Uh, some questions might not require all the 3 working notes, but these 3 working notes, you should know how to prepare these 3 working notes in order to solve the board examination questions. The first of that working note is calculation of net profit before tax and extraordinary items. And second will be working note for provision for tax and tax paid. And third, my dear children, would be working note to compute purchase / sale and depreciation on fixed assets. Now, while solving a 6 mark cash flow statement question, we will need certain numbers. Like we'll need income tax paid, we'll need the provision for tax created during the year. The starting point of the cash flow statement is the net profit before tax and extraordinary items. We need to have an understanding of how much has been charged as depreciation during the year. We also need how much we have what amount we sold the purchase fixed assets for, and for what amount we have purchased fixed assets during the year. All of that information are not directly given all the questions. Sometimes they give it directly. Sometimes they don't give it directly in a CBSE 6 mark question, and they require you to prepare the working notes for them in order to be able to solve the cash flow statement question. So in order to prepare the cash flow statement question, you need certain information which are not directly given in the questions, and those information can be found out with the information given in the question using these working notes. So even before we start learning how to solve a 6 mark question, 6 mark cash flow statement board examination question, it's important that we understand these working notes. You might wonder as to why am I not doing that questions directly and all, and what nonsense I'm talking about. Or if you're, if you're looking at this video for learning cash flow statement from scratch, and it might look like French and German to you. Just trust me and try to understand what I'm going to do, and try to understand these working note properly. And then when we start solving the questions, you will understand how they fit in nicely there, and how learning these working notes before we start solving the cash flow statement problem helps in a long way for us to solve the cash flow statement problem in an easy manner. Understood or not, my dear children? So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing I'm going to teach you is working note for provision for tax and tax paid. For provision for tax and tax paid. Understood or not, my dear children? Supposed to be working note. This is very simple, my dear children. Based on the information given in the question, We might have to prepare a working note for provision for tax and tax paid, or we might not have to prepare a working note. Now, how to determine if we have to prepare a working note or not? Now, you take the question, you can actually divide the question into three types based on this working note. A question in which opening balance of provision for tax and closing balance of provision for tax are given. Opening balance for provision for tax and closing balance of provision for tax are given. No other information given. No other information given. All right. That is one type of question. Let's call it type 1. Type 2. Opening balance and closing balance of provision for tax given. Along with that, tax paid is given. And type 3 is opening balance and closing balance are given, and along with that, provision for tax created during the year, charged to P&L during the year, is also given. Understood or not, my dear children? Now, in order to solve the cash flow statement problem, we need two things. Two information with respect to tax. The first information that we need is tax paid. You need to know the amount of tax paid while preparing the cash flow statement. The other information that we need is the amount of provision for tax created. Now, if in a particular CBSE question, they've only given the opening balance of provision for tax and closing balance of provision for tax, they have not given any information with respect to what the tax paid amount is or what the provision was, or how much provision was created, then you can assume the opening balance to be the tax paid during the year and the closing balance to be the provision created during the year. So basically, if the question, cash flow statement question, only gives you the opening balance of provision for tax and the closing balance of provision for tax, and it does not tell you what the tax paid amount was, or it does not tell you how much provision for tax was created during the year, then you can assume that the opening balance of provision for tax was the tax paid during the year and use it appropriately in the cash flow statement whenever tax paid information has to be used. And the closing balance to be the provision created during the year and use it accordingly wherever it has to be used in the preparation of cash flow statement. All right. So you don't have to do any working note. You don't have to prepare any working note if no information other than opening balance. Sorry, my dear children. Sorry, my dear children. If no other information other than opening balance and closing balance are given, you don't have to prepare any working note. In case there is information like opening and closing balance are given, and along with that, amount of tax paid is given in the question, or if opening and closing balance are given, and along with that, provision created is given in the question. Now, in that case, we will have to prepare the working note. By working note, I mean the provision for tax ledger. You prepare the provision for tax ledger. The opening balance for provision for tax ledger will be written on the credit side, as provision is a liability and liability opening balance will be on the credit side. And the closing balance will be written on the debit side. As for liabilities, the closing balance are always written on the debit side. Now, if this is, in this case, they're given the tax paid information. Am I right or not, my dear children? Now, tax paid reduces the liability. We have paid the liability, right? So, tax paid will come on the debit side as to bank account. and the provision created during the year increases the liability, and that will come in the credit side, as by P&L account, because the journal entry here is P&L account debit to provision for tax. Understood or not? So by P&L account, provision created. Now, in the second case, then in the question, they've given the opening balance of provision for tax and closing balance of provision for tax, and they have also given the tax paid. You enter the opening balance, you enter the closing balance, you enter the tax paid, and the provision for tax created during the year can be found out by balancing the ledger. It will be the balancing figure. Now, in the third case, if they have given opening balance of tax, closing balance of tax, and the provision created has been given, then you need to find the tax paid, right? So you write the opening balance, you write the closing balance, you write by P&L account as amount given as provision for tax, and the amount of bank will be the balancing figure. Tax paid will be the balancing figure. So one of these items, if they are given, you prepare the ledger and find the other item by balancing the ledger, by assuming that to be the balancing figure. But if neither tax paid or provision for tax is given in the question, then you just assume the opening balance as tax paid and assume the closing balance as provision for created. Now, this, my dear children, is one of the working notes that we need to prepare. That is working note for provision for tax and tax paid amount. Why do we need to prepare this working note? We need provision for tax amount created during the year and the tax paid during the year while preparing the cash flow statement. In order to find that information, we prepare this ledger. Now, when I'm solving the 6-mark questions in the upcoming videos, you will have an understanding of where I get these numbers from. The opening balance of provision for tax and the closing balance of provision for tax and tax paid. Usually, tax paid and provision for tax created are given as additional information below the balance sheet in the question, and opening balance and closing balance are given as a under short-term provisions in the notes to accounts. But anyway, when I'm solving the 6-mark question, I'll again remind you as to where to find these numbers from. In the next video, I'll be teaching you how to prepare the working note for purchase, sale, and depreciation on fixed assets. It's a little elaborate and little more complicated than this, but that working note, we can expect that working note to be tested in most of the questions that they're asking these days. They're actually testing that working note, so it's very important. We'll see you in the video with that working note. Until then, it's bye from Caroline's Online Academy. You people take care, have fun. Please do subscribe, share, and whatever.